Okay, we're going to do things a little differently this morning because the whole service is really a time for all ages. We're going to be talking about Purim today, and I think Seth has already allowed you to unmute yourselves. So I'm going to ask you to, you may unmute, but don't make noise just yet. I want to explain a few things about the holiday, the Jewish holiday of Purim, which is probably my favorite Jewish holiday ever. It's
the transcript says it's
like,
the holiday before.
It's a little bit like, so whoever's unmuted and speaking, please stop speaking. I hear you. I hear you speaking. So it's a little bit like Halloween and Mardi Gras and, just, a whole bunch of things all rolled into one. And it revolves around the book of Esther. Now, Esther means hidden things, or hidden. Because the book of Esther is really all about hidden things. The book of Esther is actually a comic novel. What is a comic novel doing in Hebrew scripture? What's it doing in the Bible? Oh my goodness. Well, we learn a lot from comedy, and I'll talk about that more in a little bit. But what you need to know is the basic story of Purim, because we're only going to tell a small portion of it today. So the Jews are living in exile in Persia, and the king, and we know it's a made-up time and a made-up king. So, but the king has had a 6-month drunken feast with his advisors. And he called for his queen, Vashti, to come and appear before his advisors wearing nothing but a diadem, a decorative crown. He wanted her to appear naked before all of his advisors. And she refused. Good for Vashti, right? Good for her. And so he banished her. Now, tradition, Midrash tells us he might have had her killed, but he certainly banished her. And then he was looking for a new bride. And Mordecai convinced his niece, Esther, to go and be part of the parade of beautiful young women whom the king would choose from, and to hide that she was a Jew. And lo and behold, Esther is chosen to be the new queen. So Esther is the queen, Mordecai sits at the king's gate, he's the uncle, he effectively had raised her, he's the uncle to the queen. And Haman, the bad guy, is an important courtier, advisor to the king. And he has a thorn in his side because Mordecai refused to bow down to him, because Mordecai would only bow down to God. So Mordecai refused to bow down to Haman, so Haman is just furious and decides he wants to kill all the Jews in Susa, the city where they are, wants to kill all the Jews because Mordecai wouldn't bow down to Haman. So Mordecai puts on mourning clothes, sackcloth and ashes. And this is terrible, right? And eventually you'll hear part of the story where he goes to Esther and pleads with Esther. He has messages sent back and forth because he can't go into the palace wearing mourning clothes. And he wants Esther to plead with the king to do something about this. I mean, what are we going to do? And meanwhile, Haman has planned for a special nasty death for Mordecai because he really wants to punish Mordecai. And Esther has to come up with a plan once she agrees with Mordecai to rescue the Jews for how she's going to overturn Haman and expose him for what he really is, for the evil man that he is. And how are the Jews going to come out of this? Well, I'll tell you the spoiler, they do. Esther saves the day. The Jews win and Haman loses. And so we have this celebration. Now, in the synagogue, when we celebrate, we have noisemakers, and everybody dresses in costume, and the adults are supposed to get drunk in synagogue. Bottles get passed around, and they're supposed to get so drunk that they can't tell the difference between the name of the good guy, Mordecai, and the bad guy, Haman. So you're supposed to make noise to drown out Haman's name, but what happens is there's just noise constantly. So that's why you're being unmuted. So whenever you hear Haman's name, or Haman or Haman, however it's pronounced, however our tellers and readers want to say it, whenever you hear his name, I invite you to boo or hiss or stomp your feet. And whenever you hear Mordecai's name, I invite you to yay, or clap your hands, or cheer, or whatever you want to do. And it's going to be a really noisy telling. We're going to tell part of the story. Okay? And then I'm going to ask Seth to mute everybody again when it's time for the sermon. Are we good with all of that? You got it? Okay, I see some thumbs up. Okay. So we're gonna tell part of the story, and feel free to make noise whenever you hear. Remember, Haman. Let's see. I said Haman. Okay, and Mordecai. Okay, I think we're ready to go.
Our first reading this morning is from Esther, chapter 4. I will read verses 1 through 11, and Cecilia is going to tell verses 12 through 17. Then Pastor Madelyn is going to tell most of chapter 6. When Mordecai learned what had been done, he tore his clothes, dressed in mourning clothes, and put ashes on his head. Then he went out into the heart of the city and cried out loudly and bitterly. He went only as far as the king's gate, because it was against the law for anyone to pass through it wearing mourning clothes. At the same time, in every province and place where the king's order and his new law arrived, a very great sadness came over the Jews. They gave up eating and spent whole days weeping and crying out loudly in pain. Many Jews lay on the ground in mourning clothes and ashes. When Esther's female servants and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, the queen's whole body showed how upset she was. She sent everyday clothes for Mordecai to wear instead of mourning clothes, but he rejected them. Esther then sent for Hatak, one of the royal eunuchs, whose job it was to wait on her. She ordered him to go to Mordecai and find out what was going on and why he was acting this way. Hatak went out to Mordecai in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him. He spelled out the exact amount of silver that Haman promised into the royal treasury. It was in exchange for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave Hatak a copy of the law made public in Susa concerning the Jews' destruction, so that Hatak could show it to Esther and report it to her. Through him, Mordecai ordered her to go to the king, seek his kindness and help for her people. Hatak came back and told Esther what Mordecai had said. In reply, Esther ordered Haytok to tell Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people in his provinces know that there is a single law in a case like this. Any man or woman who comes to the king in the inner courtyard without being called is to be put to death. Only the person to whom the king holds out the gold scepter may live. In my case, I haven't been called to the king in the past 30 days.
When they told Mordecai Esther's words, he had them respond to her. Don't think for 1 minute that unlike all the other Jews, you'll come out of this alive simply because you are in the palace. In fact, if you don't speak up at this very important time, relief and rescue will arrive for the Jews from another place, but you and your family will die. But who knows? Maybe it was for a moment like this that you became part of the royal family. Esther sent back this word to Mordecai.
Yay!
Gather all the Jews who are in Susa and tell them to give up eating to help me be brave. They must not eat or drink for 3 whole days, and I myself will do the same, along with my female servants. Then, even though it is against the law, I will go to the king. And if I die, I die. So Mordecai left where he was and did exactly as Esther had ordered him. That night, the king couldn't sleep. So he ordered that the annals, the book of records, be brought to him and read. And when his servants brought it, they read there that Mordecai had denounced Bigtana and Teresh, 2 of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold and who had plotted to do away with King Ahasuerus. So the king asked, what honor or advancement has been bestowed upon Mordecai for this?
Yay!
The servant said, nothing has been done for him. The king asked, who's in the courtyard? Because Haman had just entered the outer courtyard in order to talk to the king about having Mordecai impaled upon the huge stake that Haman had prepared for Mordecai.
Yay!
And the king said, have him enter. When Haman entered, the king said to him, what should be done for the man whom the king desires to honor? Haman thought to himself, whom would the king desire to honor more than me? So Haman said to the king, for the man whom the king desires to honor, have a royal robe which the king has worn be brought, and a horse on which the king has ridden, and place a royal diadem on the horse's head. Okay. And put the robe and the horse in the charge of one of the king's noble courtiers. Now, clothe the man whom the king desires to honor in the robe and place him on the horse, and then have him led through the city square while they proclaim before him, "This is what is done for the man whom the king desires to honor." And the king said, "Quick then, get the robe and the horse, and do all this to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Omit nothing of all you have said." So Haman got the robe and the horse and clothed Mordecai
Yay!
and paraded him through the city while he proclaimed before him, "This is what is done for the man whom the king desires to honor." And then Mordecai went back to the king's gate.
Yay!
And Haman
Boo.
hurried home, his head covered in mourning. Beloveds, I wish we had time to do the whole book this morning, but we don't. Perhaps another time. But what a fun story. And why comedy? Why comedy? Well, because it teaches us so much. We can learn so many lessons from it. And because even when there's deep sadness, we can learn to laugh from it. Now, I was just talking to Larry earlier, and he was telling me that he was looking for Purim music, and all of the Purim music he could find is written in a minor key. Well, you know, my people, our people, the Ashkenazi people, Ashkenazi Jews, most of our music is in a minor key. Would you like to play some of that? You know, our people, when I say our people, I'm talking about the Jews again. It's like we're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. But that doesn't mean that we don't celebrate. We do. We know how to have a good time. And this is all about having a good time, celebrating, finding joy and hope in the midst of difficult times. And Mordecai reminded Esther, here she was in the palace, that these were really bad times. And he tells her, perhaps you're in this place for such a time as this. In some translations, it's for such a time as this. This is happening because you are the one, you can do something. So she prepared first, she fasted. But the part of the story that I didn't tell you was the way she overthrew Haman was she held her own feast. She did it in the midst of a celebration. She held her own feast, a 3-night feast in which she exposed Haman to the king. She turned the tables. Beloveds, how can we find that feast? Where can we celebrate? These are tough times. And where can we dig down and what can we find? Well, first of all, what do you need to do? What do you need to dig down? And what are you being called to do? Where are you being called to help? Is it on a world stage? Are there things in the wider world that you're feeling called to help about? Is it on a smaller scale? Are you feeling called to help our church community? Yes, so Esther teaches us through joy, through silliness, how important it is to stick together in community, to be brave and to be bold. Now, as I mentioned before, Esther also means hidden. There are hidden things throughout the book. Let's examine these characters in the story. There's the king. He's very powerful. But he's also kind of stupid, dare I say. He blows in the wind. He gets turned by everything that comes along. Haman comes to him and says, hey, let's kill all the Jews. And the king says, oh, okay, sure. He demands in a drunken stupor that his first wife appear naked before all the men, and she refuses, and his response to that is, banish her. He has no respect for the humanity of any other person. And although he has great power, he is effectively a pawn. Mordecai, we call him the hero, but in many ways, he's out for himself as well. He sees an opportunity to gain power by effectively selling his niece into the palace. The king is looking for a new bride. He thinks she's pretty. Oh, go, this should be you. Go do that, go do that. It gets him influence in the palace. Haman is a straw man. We know he's evil. He's just a bad guy. He already has power and influence, but what sets him off? Mordecai refuses to bow. Goodness gracious. And then there's Esther. She's done what her uncle asks. She goes before the king. He marries her. She becomes the queen. She's hidden that she's a Jew. One of the hidden things. But when the time comes and she needs to prove who she is and to do the right thing to save her people, she does it in peril of her life. In peril of her life, beloveds. Esther is the hero of this story, and the book is named for her, and rightly so. Rightly so. Esther is also called Hadassah, and there are many Jewish organizations named Hadassah. Hadassah means laurel, like laurel leaves. Now, sometimes when I tell the part of the story that I've told today, I ask people, I give out coloring sheets, and I ask people, who are you in the story today? Who are you today? Because we've all had those moments. Maybe you're the king. We don't often get to be the king. We don't often get to be the person who is all powerful, who gets to decide things on a whim. But maybe you feel like that today. And if you do, remember that comes with great responsibility. King Ahasuerus did not recognize his responsibility. Some days, maybe you're Mordecai. You're doing good things, you get recognized for that. And isn't it wonderful to be recognized, but you don't do it because you're expecting that.
and maybe you do get recognized and led around on a horse. Maybe some days you're common. We've all done things we're not proud of, every one of us. What can you learn from those experiences? And some days, beloved, some days, every last one of us has been the horse. We do what we do, we're dressed up, we get led around, we do what we need to do, and then we're put away, we're not noticed, we are a cog in the wheel. It happens. Who are you today? I invite you, in the spirit of Purim, to color a picture of who you think you are, to draw a picture, to write a poem, whatever you're feeling. And then to remember, for such a time as this, whoever you are today, what are you being called to do today? Whether you're Esther or Mordecai, because we didn't even talk about Esther, who rose to the occasion. Whether you're Esther or Mordecai, or feeling regretful about being Haman, or the horse, or feeling all-powerful, what are you called to do today for such a time as this? How can you leverage what you are and who you are today to make a better world? And then let's celebrate that. Put on your costume. Be who you want to be. See what that feels like. And then remember the Jewish saying. In fact, my colleague, perhaps some of you know him, Rabbi Michael Singer, the rabbi of Brit Shalom, just repeated this recently to a group of colleagues the other day. Remember the Jewish saying about so many of our holidays. They tried to kill us. We survived. Let's eat. Beloveds, we will survive. Let's eat. Namaste.